Hi, and welcome back to the podcast. Or if you're new here, my name is Tuva Marina, and I am deeply, deeply grateful that you found your way here today. And honestly, before we even begin, I just want to say how much I appreciate this little space we are building together because the more episodes I record, the more I realize that what means the most to me is not only sharing information, but it is getting to have conversations that feel real. Conversations that people often just carry privately inside themselves without fully knowing how to explain. And today's episode feels very close to my heart in just that kind of way because this is something I've been thinking very deeply about recently, and not through my own life only, but also through the clients I work with, and especially people who has been moving through periods of uncertainty, transitions, burnout, or career changes, expansion, or I've just been moving to a new country. Like these big life shifts and moments where life suddenly feels less predictable than it used to. And what I have noticed, both in myself and with so many people I work with, is that uncertainty, it changes what the nervous system needs. And that is just what I want to talk about today. Because I think for a very, very long time, I approached uncertainty in a specific way. I thought the goal was to become tougher, to become more independent, more emotionally self sufficient, like strength meant handling everything alone. Like not needing support, not leaning on other people, not slowing down, and not asking for help. Almost like the more capable I became, the less support I should need. And honestly, I think a lot of high functioning people unconsciously live that way, especially people who are used to carry a lot themselves. Like you just become the reliable one, you become the strong one, you become the capable one. And then after a while, you almost stop asking yourself, what support do I need right now? Because survival mode, it teaches you to adapt and not necessarily to receive. But over the years, something has shifted for me. And especially during periods where uncertainty in my life became much bigger, after my own burnout, or when I was in a transition phase, or while rebuilding my life differently. And yeah, right now I'm moving countries, like taking bigger risks, or like I'm growing in new ways. And over the years, I just realized something important, that the answer was not, how do I become tougher so uncertainty affects me less? But I started to ask myself, what more support do I need in order to hold this well? And to be really, really honest, that shift just changed so much for me, because instead of trying to carry uncertainty alone, I started building support around myself with intention. So I found my therapist, I found my coach, I have the people I trust, I have friends I can call, and have spaces where I can process honestly, and practices that help me regulate my nervous system. And I don't have all of these things because I'm weak. No, but because uncertainty, that carries weight. And I realized something so profound, that if I do not have enough support around me, my nervous system eventually starts carrying more than it can sustainably hold alone. And this is where I think we misunderstand strength culturally, because we also think strong people need less support. But I think the bigger your life becomes, the more uncertainty you hold, the more responsibility you carry, the deeper the support needs to become too. Just like a building, the taller the building, the deeper the foundation needs to be. And I think the exact same thing applies to human beings. So today I want to talk about support, and not in a surface level way, but in a nervous system way. what it actually means to build enough support underneath yourself so your body can safely hold uncertainty without collapsing under the weight of it. Because I truly don't believe we were meant to carry everything alone. And I don't want to build my life that way anymore. And for a long time, self-reliance was a very big part of my identity. And not like in a super obvious way, but I mean, like, not in a way where I consciously walked around thinking that I have to do everything alone, but it was a bit quieter than that. For me, it was more subtle. It was normalized. Like, I had normalized it. It looked like always figuring things out myself. I was always being the one who could handle the things that was thrown towards me. And I was the one who adapted quickly. I was the one who stayed capable. And I was the one who kept moving even when things felt hard internally. And I think because I became so used to functioning that way, people around me also started seeing me that way. Strong, independent, capable. And over time, you almost start trapping yourself inside that identity. Because once people experience you as the strong one, it becomes harder to let them see the moments where you are also struggling. And if I'm being really honest, I also think a part of me did not want to burden other people. I did not want to feel needy or dramatic or dependent. So instead of reaching out, I would just carry more internally, more emotionally, mentally. I became very good at overfunctioning, very good at continuing, very good at appearing okay while carrying too much underneath. And I know that so many of you who are listening right now relate to that feeling. Because overfunctioning can actually become a survival strategy. You become the person who handles things before anyone notices that you are overwhelmed. You solve problems quickly, you stay productive, and you stay emotionally composed. And from the outside, that can look like strength, but internally, it can become incredibly lonely. Because there is a specific kind of loneliness that happens when everyone experiences you as capable all the time. People assume you are okay because you function well. And sometimes you even convince yourself that you are okay because you have become so disconnected from your own need for support. And one of the hardest realizations for me was recognizing how deeply I had connected worthiness to self sufficiency. Like needing support somehow meant failure. Like strength meant carrying uncertainty quietly by myself. And I think so many high functioning people unconsciously live inside that belief, especially people who grew up learning that being easy or capable or emotional self contained made them feel safer or made them feel more valued. But over time, I started to realize something very human. Just because I can carry everything alone does not mean I want to anymore. And that realization actually made me emotional when I first admitted it to myself, because underneath all the capability, there was also exhaustion. And I'm not talking about physical exhaustion, but the emotional exhaustion from constantly holding myself through everything alone. And I remember reaching a point where I just thought that I don't actually want to build a life where I have to carry everything alone. Not because I'm incapable, but because humans were never meant to regulate entirely alone. We are relational beings. Our nervous systems respond to support, to connection, to being witnessed, and to feeling held emotionally during certain periods. And I think there is something very beautiful about allowing yourself to need support without making that mean weakness. Because real strength is not emotional isolation. Real strength is knowing how to build enough support underneath yourself so your nervous system doesn't have to carry the full weight of life alone all the time. And I think that shift changed my relationship with uncertainty completely. This was not because uncertainty disappeared, but because I stopped believing I had to survive it entirely by myself. And this is where I want to mention something that changed the way I understand healing completely. Because what I slowly started realizing was that my nervous system was never actually asking me to become harder. It was asking me to become more supported. And that is a very different thing. I think we often talk about healing, growth, or emotional resilience in a very individualistic way. Like the goal is to become so evolved, so healed, so independent that nothing affects us anymore. But biologically, that is not how human nervous systems work. We are relational nervous systems, meaning our bodies constantly respond to the people, environment, and support systems that we have around us. This is why you can walk into a room and immediately feel calmer around certain people, or why a conversation with someone safe can completely change your internal state, or why uncertainty suddenly feels more manageable after talking honestly to someone you trust. That is not weakness. That is nervous system physiology. And once I understood that, I stopped seeing support as something optional. I started seeing it as part of my foundation, as part of how I hold uncertainty without collapsing under it. Because uncertainty feels very different when you are carrying it alone. When everything stays trapped internally, the nervous system has nowhere to release the load, no place to process, no place to soften, no place to reorganize emotionally. And eventually, the body starts carrying all of it by itself. But something very different happens when uncertainty becomes shared. And when someone listens, when someone helps you regulate, when someone reminds your nervous system that you are not alone in this. When you feel that, the body often softens automatically, not because the uncertainty disappeared, but because the nervous system no longer feels isolated inside it. And I have seen this so many times, both in my own life and in the work I do with clients. And I'm not over exaggerating when I am saying that there has been moments where one conversation with the right person changed my entire internal state. And not because that person magically fixed my life, but because my body no longer felt like it had to hold everything alone. And that matters more than people realize. And this is also why support can take many different forms. Sometimes it is therapy. Sometimes it is coaching. Sometimes it is that friend you can fully exhale around, just call and ah. Sometimes it is mentorship. Sometimes it is having structure and routines, like having them in place during chaotic periods. Or other times it is simply having one person who sees the full truth of what you are carrying right now. And I think one of the most healing things for the nervous system is feeling emotionally witnessed without needing to perform strength all the time, without needing to be the capable one every single second, without needing to already have everything figured out before reaching out. Because co-regulation is not dependency, it is biology. It is what happens when nervous systems help each other feel safer. And I think many high-functioning people underestimate how much easier life becomes when support stops feeling like something you have to earn. I know for me, personally, there was a huge shift when I stopped waiting until complete overwhelm before allowing myself support. And I actually stopped treating support like an emergency resource. And instead, I started building it proactively as a part of my life, as a part of my nervous system care, part of my foundation. Because uncertainty, it doesn't automatically disappear as your life grows. If anything, expansion often creates more uncertainty, more visibility, more responsibility, more unknowns, more emotional exposure. And that is exactly why support matters more and not less. I think one of the biggest lies we have normalized culturally is the idea that emotionally healthy people should need less support. When in reality, some of the strongest people I know are the ones who intentionally build support around themselves before they break. I used to think that becoming stronger meant becoming more unaffected, more independent, more emotionally self sufficient, more able to carry pressure without needing any kind of support. But now I see it completely different. I think growth actually increases what the nervous system has to hold, not only practically, but also emotionally, because bigger dreams create bigger uncertainty, expansion create exposure, visibility creates vulnerability, and all of that creates nervous system load. And I think sometimes or oftentimes people underestimate this part completely. They say they want more success, more freedom, more responsibility, more visibility, more expansion, but they do not realize that every new level of growth also asks the nervous system to hold more uncertainty, to hold more unknowns, to hold more emotional risk, more instability between the old version of life and the new one that hasn't fully formed yet. And that space can feel incredibly uncomfortable for the body. Because uncertainty is not just a mindset experience, it is physiological. The nervous system wants predictability, it wants familiarity, structure, knowing what comes next. So when your life starts expanding, and also positively, the body often feels more activation at first. And not because growth is wrong, but because uncertainty naturally requires more internal capacity. So when you look at very tall buildings, the reason they can hold so much weight, so much height, and so much pressure is because the foundation underneath them is incredibly deep. The support structure becomes stronger as the building grows taller, and human beings work the exact same way. The higher I wanted to grow, the more support I needed to safely hold the uncertainty that came with growth. And that realization just changed my relationship with ambition completely, because I stopped seeing support as something you need when you are failing, and I started seeing it as something intelligent people build when they are expanding. So now when I look back at periods in my life where I struggled the most, it was often not because uncertainty existed. It was because I was trying to carry uncertainty without enough support underneath me. I was trying to hold transitions alone. I was trying to regulate myself entirely alone. I was trying to process emotional weight privately while still functioning externally. And eventually, the nervous system starts buckling under unsupported pressure. But when the foundation deepens, everything changes. And this is not because uncertainty disappears, but because the body no longer feels alone inside it. And for me, personally, deepening the foundation started looking like very intentional support, therapy, coaching, friends I could be honest with, practices that regulated my nervous system, structure during uncertain periods, just these moments of slowing down completely and having my spaces where I didn't need to perform capability all the time. The more I allowed support to come into my life, the more capacity I actually had for growth. Because support increases capacity, and that is the part people miss. We often think support makes people weaker, but nervous system wise, support is what allows humans to hold bigger emotional loads without collapsing internally. And I no longer admire the version of strength where someone just carries everything alone. I don't think that is strength anymore. I think true strength is building a life where your nervous system is supported enough to sustainably hold the weight of the life you want to create. Because the goal is not how much can I survive alone. The goal is how well supported can I become while building a meaningful life. And that feels like a much softer, healthier, and more human way to live. And I think that is where support becomes important to redefine. Because when people hear the word support, they often imagine something dramatic, like being completely dependent on other people, or incapable of functioning alone, or needing someone to come and save them. But that is not what I mean at all. What I mean is something much more grounded, something much more human. That support is the things that help your nervous system sustainably hold life. That is it. And I think many of you already know what supports you, that you maybe don't just allow yourself to fully prioritize it. And especially when life gets busy, and especially during periods of uncertainty. Support actually becomes the first thing people remove when it is often the thing people need the most. For me, support started looking very intentional, not by accident. I stopped waiting until I was completely overwhelmed before reaching for help. I started building support proactively, almost like building pillars underneath myself. And again, for me, that has been looking like therapy, or having a space where I didn't need to hold everything alone internally, or a space where I could just speak honestly before my nervous system reached overload. And for me, with coaching, it's been so valuable to have someone help me see patterns that I cannot clearly see from inside myself, and have that someone that holds perspective when uncertainty made everything feel emotionally loud. And then support for me can also look very simple, like just calling a friend instead of isolating, just letting them know, like, hey, I'm having kind of a rough day or a rough week, and just removing the urge to perform strength all the time, to not just automatically be saying, I'm fine when I was not fine. And honestly, that alone changed my nervous system more than I expected. Because honestly, there is something really regulating about feeling emotionally honest with safe people. I also have created support in terms of routines, like rhythm and structures, and things that gives my nervous system predictability during uncertain periods. And these are super, super simple things. It could be like a morning walk, journaling, breath work, movement, just eating at consistent times, or going to bed at similar times. And I don't do this because I want to be someone who's perfect. No, because structure, it gives the nervous system something stable to hold on to when life feels uncertain. I also think we need to talk more openly about practical support, like financial support, asking for help, sharing responsibility, not carrying everything alone all the time. Because sometimes nervous systems, they become exhausted, not only emotionally, but also logistically, from trying to hold too much with too little support underneath. And I think one of the biggest mindset shifts for me was realizing that support is not weakness. Support is nervous system sustainability. And seeing it in that way removed shame from needing support. And it stopped making support mean that I cannot handle life alone. And instead, it just made it feel like I care enough about my well being to not force my nervous system to carry unnecessary weight alone. And I think emotionally healthy people understand something very important, that needing support does not make you dependent. It makes you resourced, and that is a huge difference. Dependency says, I cannot function without someone saving me. And support is saying, I intentionally build things into my life that help my nervous system stay regulated, stay connected, and stay sustainable. That, that is wisdom and not weakness. And honestly, the older I get, the less impressed I am by people who can silently carry everything alone. And the more I admire people who know how to build lives that actually support their nervous systems while they are growing. Because that is what creates sustainable expansion, not survival mode disguised as strength. And honestly, I think one of the saddest parts of being high functioning sometimes is how invincible your struggle can become. Because when you are someone who still shows up and still performs and still get the things done, people often assume that you are okay. And after a while, you start assuming that too. And I think there is a very specific loneliness that can exist inside capability, where externally your life may even look impressive. You are functioning, working, achieving, holding all of these things together. but internally you feel like you are carrying an emotional weight that very few people actually see because you became so good at carrying it quietly. And I know this feeling so deeply. I know the feeling of being the one who handles things and the one who figures everything out, the one who adapts, the one who keeps moving no matter what. And there is a certain safety in becoming that person because if you are always capable, you rarely have to risk being vulnerable. You rarely have to risk disappointing people. And you rarely have to fully let people see how much you are actually carrying underneath. But what I slowly realized is that functioning well externally does not automatically mean your nervous system feels supported internally. And I think many high functioning people live inside that gap, looking composed on the outside while internally feeling exhausted, feeling emotionally isolated, or just deeply overwhelmed. And the difficult part is that the more capable you appear, the less people tend to check on you deeply. Because capability can create invincibility, and people just assume that she's fine, he's handling it, or they're strong. And maybe you even reinforce that narrative yourself. Because over time, you stop wanting to burden people, you stop reaching out, and you stop fully expressing your needs. Not because you don't have them, but because you became so identified with being the strong one. And honestly, I think some people become so good at self reliance that they don't even realize how emotionally alone they feel anymore until the body starts showing them through exhaustion, through burnout, through anxiety, emotional overwhelm, through the nervous system just saying that I can't keep carrying all of this unsupported. And I think this is why burnout can feel so emotionally confronting for high functioning people specifically, because it forces you to face the places where you have been over carrying life alone. It forces you to face those places where you stopped letting yourself be supported. And I think one of the bravest things a person can do is allow themselves to be fully seen before they completely collapse. Not after burnout destroys the body, but before. To let people come in while you are still functioning, to tell the truth while you still look okay, and to stop waiting until total overwhelm before allowing support. Because being emotionally supported is not something you earn only once you have reached a breaking point. You are allowed to need support while still being capable. And that is something I really wish more people understood. And I think many people listening to this are not actually craving advice as much as they are craving emotional permission. Permission to stop carrying everything alone. Permission to let themselves be supported. Permission to stop performing strength every second of the day. People who look the strongest externally are often the ones holding the heaviest emotional load internally. And I think healing begins the moment you stop glorifying silent suffering and start building relationships, spaces, and support systems where your nervous system no longer has to carry life entirely by itself. And I also think there is something else that happens when you become very high functioning for a long time. You become incredibly good at carrying emotional weight privately to the point where people around you may genuinely have no idea how much is happening inside you. And that sometimes can start feeling strangely normal. You just answer messages, you go to work, you show up socially, keep performing, keep functioning, while internally feeling completely overloaded. Because you still look fine externally, but the nervous system never fully receives the experience of being held and being supported and being met in the full truth of what is actually happening inside. And I think this creates a very particular kind of emotional isolation. where you can be surrounded by people and still feel emotionally alone. Because emotional loneliness is not about proximity, it is about how much of yourself feels safe to reveal. And I think many high functioning people become so identified with being composed that they stop letting people witness them honestly in real time. So, not after they have already processed everything, and I'm not after they've already figured it out, but while they're still inside that uncertainty, while they're still confused, while they're still overwhelmed, and still human. And I know for me, one thing I had to slowly learn was how to let people support me before I had already carried everything alone for too long. Because I was very used to processing things privately first and handling everything internally, like just trying to become okay enough before reaching out. Almost like I needed to pre process my humanity before it became acceptable to share. And to be honest, that is exhausting. Because what I eventually realized is that emotional support is not only about problem solving. Sometimes the nervous system, it just needs shared reality, like someone sitting beside you emotionally while uncertainty is still happening. Someone who knows that what you are going through is hard for you right now, without immediately trying to fix it or minimize it, or making you feel like you should already have it handled. And I think that is why emotionally safe relationships are so regulating for the nervous system, and not because they remove uncertainty, but because they reduce aloneness. And uncertainty that feels dramatically much more heavier when the body believes that I have to carry all of this by myself. I also think many capable people secretly fear becoming dependent if they let themselves receive too much support. But emotionally healthy support actually creates more resilience and not less, because supported nervous systems, they have more capacity, they have more adaptability and more flexibility. So it's it has the ability to move through hard seasons without collapsing internally. And I no longer think that emotional maturity means that you have to handle everything you're alone. I think emotional maturity is being able to say that this season feels heavy and I'm going to let myself be supported through it. And to be able to say that without feeling any shame, without making it mean weakness, and without abandoning yourself emotionally just to maintain the image of being strong. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop performing in vulnerability long enough to let your nervous system experience what support actually feels like. So, if there's one thing I really hope you take with you from today's episode, is that you are allowed to be supported. Not only when things become unbearable, not only after burnout and after the collapse, not only once you have proven that you have struggled enough, but now, as you are now, in the middle of uncertainty, in the middle of growth, in the middle of not fully knowing. I know many people unconsciously just wait until they are completely overwhelmed before allowing themselves support. Like they need to earn care through exhaustion first. But I don't think we were ever meant to live that way. I don't think the nervous system was designed to carry the full emotional weight of life entirely alone. I think one of the most healing things we can do is stop waiting until breaking point before we soften toward ourselves. Support is not something reserved for crisis. Support is what helps prevent the crisis from consuming you in the first place. It is the foundation underneath uncertainty. It is the thing that allows the nervous system to hold growth, change, transitions, grief, expansion, and the unknown without constantly tipping into survival mode. I really used to admire people who could silently carry everything alone. But now I admire people who know how to build lives that emotionally sustain them. People who know when to slow down, when to reach out, when to ask for help, when to let themselves be seen honestly. That feel like real strength for me now, not isolation disguised as independence. And if you are in a season of uncertainty right now, I hope this episode reminds you to ask yourself a different question. I don't want you to ask yourself, how do I become tougher? I want you to ask yourself, what support would help my nervous system hold this more safely? Maybe you start letting support look like finally talking honestly to someone. Maybe it looks like therapy or coaching or creating more structure in your days or allowing yourself rest without guilt or just simply admitting that I don't actually want to carry all of this alone anymore. And that admission, that is not weakness. It is wisdom. Because the taller your life becomes, the deeper your foundation needs to be. And there is nothing shameful about building that foundation internally. In fact, I think it is one of the most self-respecting things a person can do. And before we end today, I just want to say thank you again for being here. Like, truly, I never take it lightly that people choose to spend this time with me and listening to these conversations and reflecting alongside me and growing alongside me. And I hope this episode made you feel a little less alone in whatever uncertainty might be carrying right now. That you become a little softer with yourself, a little more supported internally, and a little less convinced that you have to survive everything by yourself. And until next time, stay aligned, stay curious, and most important of all, stay true to yourself.